So the MCU timeline is now officially messed up. Let's talk about a bunch of inaccuracies that happened throughout the series, and probably more that will be found. So where exactly do we begin with the problems with the official MCU timeline? Well, let's jump right into Iron Man 1. So the film came out in 2008, and all of us assumed the film takes place in 2008, till the official timeline told us it takes place in 2010, which brings a whole lot of problems around. First up, let's talk about a throwaway one, but it's kind of socially relevant. Right at the beginning, Tony Stark mentions MySpace. MySpace was dead by 2010. But that's not here nor there. Let's talk about an actual one that's important to the plot of the movie. There's of course the scene where Tony Stark announces the fundamental shift in Stark Industries, and we see that the stocks are going down. We see the Mad Money report. This report says 2008. So unless somehow Thanos and Doctor Strange's time manipulation has changed the date and this is all going to be a ramification that we see play out throughout Avengers 4, there's a major glaring plot hole here. We know Iron Man 2 takes place 6 months after Tony Stark reveals himself to the world. So maybe if we say that Iron Man 1 takes place in the fall of 2008, we could probably say that Iron Man 2 takes place in spring of 2009. Except the official timeline now tells us that the film takes place in 2011, alongside The Incredible Hulk and Thor 1. Those movies don't really give us any concrete details or dates on when they take place, but here's the official timeline, and we know they're obviously a sequel to Iron Man 1, and we know that they all take place during the same week. Which brings us to Iron Man 2, because the Stark Expo, that's featured very much throughout the movie and is important to the plot, takes place in 2010. The Stark Expo website has 2010 all over it, it's in the trailer, the visual art book, and they even have a banner for it, so there's another problem. Then we go on to 2012, where this is where the Avengers takes place, which takes us all the way to Spider-Man Homecoming, which now takes place in 2016. But it can't possibly take place in 2016 when the opening of the movie says it takes place 8 years after the Battle of New York during the Avengers. Which means only 4 years have went by instead of 8. And if we go by the 8 years, that means the Battle of New York happened in 2008, meaning the Avengers formed 2 years before Tony Stark ever became Iron Man. Speaking of that, Civil War also takes place in 2016. In that movie, Vision directly says it's been 8 years since Tony Stark revealed himself to the world as Iron Man, which would once again place Iron Man 1 in 2008, and not 2010. Now, unless Vision somehow, with all of his calculations, messes up on math, I think this is once again a major problem. Hey, and speaking of Tony Stark, remember when he says that Thanos has been in his head? And he says he's been in his head for 6 years? Which means that he's been in his head since he almost died during the Battle of New York, and the Chitauri armies that Thanos sent. Which would mean Avengers Infinity War takes place in 2018, except the official timeline tells us it takes place in 2017. Now remember Ant-Man and the Wasp? It directly relates and happens during the events of Avengers Infinity War, so that movie takes place during 2017 as well. Except Civil War happens in 2016, so how is it possible that Scott was on house arrest for 2 years? Thor Ragnarok is also set to take place right before the events of Avengers Infinity War, and that makes sense, up until you look at what they said, and they say that it takes place in 2016. As Taika himself has said that the battle for Ragnarok happens right alongside the events of Civil War. And then that the ending has a jump forward that leads into Infinity War. And speaking of Infinity War, that movie is a direct lead-in from the previous films. We know this. The film before it, Captain America Civil War, has a few movies that pick up directly from the end of it. Specifically Black Panther, which is shown to take place exactly 1 week after the events of Civil War. The whole film is based around T'Challa taking on the new mantle, returning and not being accepted by certain other parties. Except in the new official timeline, we're told that the film takes place a year later in 2017, right before Infinity War. So that's just some of the more glaring omissions I could come up and remember off the top of my head. Honestly, there's probably quite a bit more that I'm not even really thinking about here. You guys can let me know about those in the comments, but I think it's safe to say that the timeline is more messed up now than we previously thought it was with this official reveal.